Jermell Charlo becomes undisputed light middleweight champion with a 10th round knockout over Brian Castano in what was another closely contested fight. I predicted that Jermell Charlo would win this fight. However, I thought it'd go to points. I thought he'd win a narrow points decision, but he landed a peach of a left hook in the 10th round, which just completely took Brian Castano out of the fight. In my pre-fight video, I outlined some keys to victory, and I felt that Brian Castano would have to do more of the same, but just be a bit more conservative when he was able to pin down Jermell Charlo and not be greedy, because Jermell Charlo, when he knocks people out and when he gets his best work off, a lot of the time he's punching with them. Jermell Charlo, I felt, had more improvements he could make. I felt that he needed to be more mobile and be a bit looser, get rid of this kind of coiled spring style that he has, and just loosen up and learn to let his work flow, especially at long range, to avoid being caught on the ropes by Castano and caught up close, seeing as Castano's quite a bit smaller than him, and it's really an advantage that Charlo shouldn't give up. And for the most part, I want to say that Jermell Charlo did a fairly decent job of doing that. He was not doing his best Muhammad Ali impression in the ring, but he was more mobile in this fight, and often he would land his shots and move off, but not just move off in a like backing off. He'd move off at an angle. He could have done with a bit more head movement and maybe a bit more of an appropriate guard, because sometimes he was still getting caught as he was moving off. However, it was much better than him just backing off to the ropes or staying in front of Castano. He also seemed to loosen up a little bit with his upper body. He was trying to give Brian Castano some different looks, but you can see that Charlo, he's not someone who's had a lot of practice slipping from either side of the centre line. So he was still a little bit stiff in the back, but with that foot movement and I think just better, more frequent use of the jab, it afforded him a lot of success. However, Castano still had some success timing that jab, especially with the right hand over the top. And however, despite this success, because as I say, there were a lot of close exchanges, there was a lot of you go, I go. And both guys, I feel early on, they were struggling to kind of get some clearance from each other. It was very closely contested, which I think these guys are always going to be in close fights. They're very evenly matched. And yeah, we saw more of that in this fight. Brian Castano, I felt, I think he was less impressive in this fight. Because in the first fight, he really surprised me. Because the fights I'd seen of him prior to that, I wasn't particularly impressed. But when he came out in the first fight against Charlo, he had a very good active guard. And he was able to control the fight at long range. And really get off a lot of good work against Jermell Charlo. As I say, especially at long range, which was surprising. Because Brian Castano is only like 5'7", compared to Jermell Charlo, who's 5'11", 6 foot. So it's very impressive when you see the shorter man being the more accomplished and technical boxer at long range. And I felt that he'd have to carry that over into this fight. However, he didn't seem to do that for my money. I felt Brian Castano was less impressive in this fight because he was just kind of going through the motions. He understood what he had to do, but he didn't commit to it. His active guard, from what I saw, wasn't as effective. It wasn't as I don't want to say is deliberate, but he didn't invest into it as much. He was, as I say, just going through the motions, and it was like he knew that he could hit Jermell Charlo and do damage, but he didn't go out of his way to really think it through and set up his shots. Jermell Charlo, on the other hand, he was moving around the ring, not excessively, but just enough, which was good. As I say, he was moving off at an angle at times, letting the jab flow, and he was able to time Castano, because Castano's active guard wasn't as good in this fight, and Jermell Charlo was able to time him as he was coming forward. And yeah, it was good stuff. It was close though. Early on, I didn't really keep. I wasn't keeping a score. I wasn't scoring the rounds and keeping track, but I had the feeling that Jermell Charlo was more comfortable than Brian Castano. And then in the 7th round, I feel like that was really made apparent because Castano, you could visibly see the damage starting to accumulate on his face. He looked more tired. His legs didn't look like they were as strong. And this, in the meantime, Jermell Charlo was looking just as strong as he did early on in the fight. And his work rate was carrying on going, whereas Castano was slowing down a little bit, and you can see his eyes were starting to swell up. He was starting to get some bruising. And then it got to the 10th round. It was a little bit of a strange knockout. Jermell Charlo landed this really good left hook, and then they kind of fell into a bit of a clinch. And all of a sudden, you just see Brian Castano's leg, his right leg, buckle underneath him, and he's down on one knee. Referee rightly gives him a count. He beats the count, stands up, and he looks completely drunk. And at first, it looked like the ref was going to stop it there, but then the referee let it continue. And as the referee backed off, Jermell Charlo has now advanced towards Brian Castano, and Castano's leg's just gone. He falls into rope, and I think he even takes a couple of heavy shots, and then that's it. He's down again, and the referee doesn't even bother to give him the full count. And in my opinion, stoppage is perfectly fine. I don't think anyone's going to complain about it anyway, but yeah, I don't think that was stopped early at all. I don't think Brian Castano was in any fit shape to defend himself. He couldn't even stand up. So credit to Jermell Charlo. He lands a peach of a punch and has the last laugh as he's now undisputed light middleweight champion. So yeah, I feel like overall it was another fairly entertaining fight. It was a good performance by Jermell Charlo because of course he's now undisputed champion and was able to secure it with another highlight reel knockout. But I still feel like technically there's room for him to grow. And I think I'd like to see Charlo shop around a little bit, maybe see some other trainers and add to his game, because he's a great athlete. You can see that. He's powerful, he's quick, he's got good balance, but his technique is still quite limited. There's not much variation, and the technique he does have is a little bit rough around the edges. So I'd like to see him hopefully learn from these fights and actually look at how Brian Castano had success against him and look to employ that in his own game. Use the active guard, use the feints, use the softer, quicker probing shots, and just work towards becoming a more complete fighter, because he's clearly very effective. And there are quite a few people I've spoken to who agree with me. Jermell Charlo isn't much of a boxer, but I feel like he can benefit from learning how to box and improving his fundamentals and adding to his game. But it'll be interesting to see who he fights next as well. Who is there really at 154 pounds? I imagine that Tim Tszyu would maybe... Is he a mandatory? I think he's pretty highly ranked by the sanctioning bodies. But yeah, I'd like to see that fight. And I think that's a tough fight for Jermell Charlo if he takes it, because Tim Tszyu, in his own right, is a very good boxer with some very strong technique. Maybe a little bit green, but he's slowly but steadily going up the rankings and fighting better opposition. So yeah, if that's the next fight, bring it on. I'd love to see that. Brian Castano, on the other hand, he's a very skilled fighter, but I feel like he maybe lacks some discipline. I feel like he's quite hot-headed and potentially deviates from his technique and his game plan. But he's a good fighter, and I think he's still got a lot to give. Say if Jermell Charlo was to move up to middleweight, which I don't know the likelihood of that is, I definitely think that Brian Castano has the ability to become a champion again, and maybe he can have a crack at becoming undisputed again. Who knows? But yeah, congratulations to Jermell Charlo becoming the latest undisputed champion. Commiserations to Brian Castano, but he's a great fighter and I'm sure he'll come again. And yeah, that's my take on this fight. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you agree with my take? Do you disagree? What do you think of the fight? Where would you like to see both men go next? Leave it down there. I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.